first cluster is all about economic impact. With no further ado, here we go.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Brigid Tuck. I'm the Senior Economic Impact Analyst with Extension. I had the pleasure of working with the Great Northern Festival to measure their economic impact for their 2024 event. If you're not familiar with the Great Northern, it was originally conceived as an opportunity to kind of bring together some of the marquee events such as the Winter Carnival, the Lopit, and kind of market Minneapolis, St. Paul as a destination for winter fun. What has happened as it's kind of evolved is it has kind of broken out into still those marquee events and still partnerships to promote those, but as well as we have developed Great Northern has developed some of its own programming, and it puts that programming into basically four buckets. One is arts, one is outdoor active, one is food and drink, and one is climate. So we worked with the organizers of the festival to examine the events that are directly hosted by the Great Northern Festival under each one of those umbrellas. And we did a survey as part of that work. Shinyi, next slide. Well, here are some of our key findings. The first finding that we came to is that the festival is growing and attracts people to new locations. One of the really cool things about the Great Northern Festival is that it's held at various locations across the Twin Cities. So, for example, under the arts bucket, there might be some concerts happening at First Avenue. There might be plays and poetry readings and things happening at some of the big theater spaces in the Twin Cities. The Sauna Village, which is part of the outdoor, that's very, very popular. That happens at Malcolm Yards. There's also programming at individual parks across the park system. And that's really helping people to get into new spaces that they hadn't been in before. And as you know, from a tourism perspective, getting people into your community and getting them to see you is really important. So we saw that they are really driving new visits within the Twin Cities region. They also had 70% of the attendees were first-time attendees. So bringing new people to the festival and bringing them out into the community. Next, Shani. We also found that diverse and eclectic programming is what people really value about it. So we asked in the survey, tell us what you really like about the Great Northern Festival. And they really love that idea of being able to get out across the Twin Cities and see different parts of the city. So you see that eclectic mix of activities and locations. People really do love the Sauna Village. It's a very Minnesota way to celebrate winter. So we saw a lot of people mentioning that. But then you can also see some of the things, the founding principles of the Great Northern Festival come through, the wanting to embrace winter in the outdoors, the focus on climate. And then what you see, which is really cool, is this is a very diverse in terms of the artists that are involved, in terms of the activities. And so you see that people are excited about that welcoming atmosphere. There's a lot of Indigenous programming. People are really appreciate that part of the festival as well. Next slide, Shini. Our third finding is that this is really a uniquely Minnesota event, right? Who gets outside so much in winter? Minnesotans. So when we asked people to kind of rank a list of things that they really appreciated about the Great Northern Festival, bringing those unique opportunities to the Twin Cities was number one, followed by that drive to increase enthusiasm for winter. Then you can see kind of that connections with community and other people. What you notice kind of lower down on this list is, being a family or personal tradition. Well, when you have 70% of the people new, that's not surprising. And then that opportunity to visit the Twin Cities. So we did find that this is mostly a Twin Cities based audience right now, but I think that's part of kind of the newness of the Great Northern Festival, this newer programming that they're offering, and it gives them an opportunity to sort of build their reputation and start to draw more people in from a wider distance. So final slide, Shini. And so our conclusion here is that we did find the Great Northern Festival draws and generates economic activity. Again, it's relatively, kind of new with this programming that's sponsored by the Great Northern itself. So it's drawing about 4,000 people. Created about $2.1 million in economic activity in the Twin Cities region, which includes $680,000 worth of labor income, which is, money into the pocket of the people that live in the communities. I think what's really impressive about this particular festival and sort of sets it apart from others is that when you look at sort of the top industries that are impacted, so who benefits the most, arts is in that top 10. We don't usually see that. We see kind of some of the traditional things around real estate and professional and business services. but this is really helping to benefit the arts community as well. So overall, there's a lot of information. This report is available on our website. I encourage you guys to go check it out. Shinny, last slide. It's just my contact information in case anybody wants to get a hold of me.
Thank you so much, Brigid. Now let's keep going. The next presentation, Northeast Minnesota ATV Trails Project by John Bennett.
Thank you, Shinyi. And I'm sandwiched in between Brigid Tuck here, which is never a great place to be. Good morning or late morning, everyone. My name is John Bennett. I'm an extension educator in Northeast Minnesota, based out of Duluth. And I'm going to tell you just a little bit about a project that Brigid and I have been working on, over the last 2 or 3 years or so. This project started, I'm going to be talking about ATV trails in Northeast Minnesota and their economic contribution, why and how we started to get involved with this kind of work, and some of the progress that we've made, like on the research side, and also progress that's been made by policymakers and a different group that's working on this. This project started a few years ago while I was having lunch in the basement of the former Tower, Minnesota mayor's basement, eating tuna fish sandwiches. And the head of the Forest Service was there, and he was telling me about some issues with ATV trails. And he put me in touch with Brigid and I in touch with the Joint Powers Board, which consisted of Koochiching County, Lake County, and St. Louis County. And they had questions about their growing sport and activity. Some of their questions were, how much do ATV riders spend while they're here? Which businesses benefit directly from this use? What businesses benefit indirectly from the use? And what opportunities might we want to start to be thinking about? And you can see here, we've got a map of all the trails. So there's probably more than you thought of. Chini, next slide, please. Okay, so first, just looking at trail different counts, these trails are very popular. I suspect that they're more popular than most residents in Northeast Minnesota probably really anticipated to see. All in all, we got just over 220,000 trail riders that we counted using counters over a year-long period of time, which is a pretty substantial number. We also know, because we ended up sending a survey to all of these people that or many people who are riding on these trails, and we found that people who were visiting the area spent about $144 per day, and local residents who decided to answer the survey spent about $38 a day. So it's quite a bit of a difference in how much money local riders are spending versus visitors who are coming in from out of town. It's not all that surprising, but not something that we talk about all too much for this type of recreational activity. 91% who came used an official trail. And yeah, again, just under 220,000 riders. Thanks, Shinyi. Next slide. 80% of the folks that were up here were visitors. The industries that benefited the greatest were lodging, restaurant, and gas stations, in addition to real estate, the real estate sector, and utilities. Visitors were here, and they were spending on an average of 5 days when they were here, and they generated a total of $36.1 million in economic activity. In addition to that, they supported 300 jobs in Minnesota. Next slide. So one of the cool parts, you're going to hear a little bit more about this later on, but in addition to the survey that we distributed to people who were riding on the trail, we also used mobile analytics to help us with this analysis as well. So in addition to the qualitative information that we had from them, and asking a whole bunch of different information about how much money they were spending and what attracted them to the area, we also know that the popularity has been increasing just when we were looking at parking lots and the average use or the use of parking lots. This is from the Matilla rest stop from June to November of 2023. And so we're giving our clients here, or these three different communities, this Joint Powers Board, some great information about the increase in the use of the rest stop and parking, which just kind of also points to the overall popularity of the sport. And last slide, please. And then finally, the key takeaways are here. You can read more about it on the report, but designated trails for ATV use are drawing visitors to the region. The positive reputation is driving visits and influencing lengths of stay. ATV riders and trail development drives economic activity and is important, and further trail development would bring more riders to the region.
Our next presentation is again going to be delivered by Brigid. This one is hot off the press.
That's right. Thank you, Shinny. Yep, this is so hot off the press. There isn't a formal written report yet, but it's forthcoming. So if you weren't aware, in June of 2024, Minneapolis and the St. Twin Cities region, we became Gymnastic City, USA. We hosted the National Olympic team trials for the gymnastics team. So we had great gymnasts such as Simone Biles and Suni Lee were competing right here in Minneapolis at the Target Center. In addition, the United States Gymnastics Association, they set up in the Minneapolis Convention Center and did some of their trade show and then some of their competitions for some of their younger athletes as well. So we had thousands of people come into the Minneapolis-St. Paul region for that. We were asked by Minnesota Sports and Events to measure the economic impact of the event, and we also did a survey for this. So here's a few of the things that we found from that. First, we found that the trials did improve perceptions of the Minneapolis-St. Paul region. So we asked the question, how did you feel about Minneapolis-St. Paul before you came? Again, from a tourism perspective, having 2 out of every 3 people say they had a more favorable view of the Twin Cities after their visit is a really strong metric for hosting these events, kind of that halo effect of liking the community better. When we asked them a little bit to kind of prioritize some of the things they liked, the top 2 were that they enjoyed the quality of the event facilities and the friendliness of our community. And then we had some open-ended responses where people talked about the pedestrian friendliness and the ease of being able to move around the downtown Minneapolis area. So some of the things we pride ourselves on as Minnesotans, people really enjoyed as well. Next slide, Shani. We also found that the trials were driving business to our retail and dining options. So we asked people, where did you go? Where did you visit when you were here? You can see, of course, when people are in town for a few days, one of their things they got to do is eat. So a lot of people talked about or mentioned that they went to a local restaurant or a brewery. But you can see also that we're getting people out in the community, even though they maybe came to Minneapolis for the event. A lot of people going to the Mall of America, going to Target Field. We saw some people indicating that they did some shopping kind of around the Twin Cities area. But then also going out and enjoying some of our really cool recreational assets between the museum and the sculpture garden, going to the Stone Arch Bridge, of those kinds of things. And we also found that 28% of the people who responded to the survey had never visited the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. So we did get a lot of people, new people coming to the region and leaving with a very favorable impression of all the really cool things we have to offer in Minneapolis and St. Paul. So next slide, Shani. As John mentioned, one of the things we've been doing a little bit is working with mobile analytics data. So this is from our Placer AI subscription. This looks at the Target Center during the event, and it shows kind of the red bar where people were prior to attending the events at the Target Center, and then the gray is where they were afterwards. You can see very much we're driving a lot of hotel activity as well, right? So 48% of the people, those events kind of went into the evening. They went home and they went to bed. You can see that, but you can also see the impact that this is having where people are engaging in leisure activities. They're going to the stores, they're doing kind of things in the community. You can also see the impact on the dining portion of this. Part of that leisure was also that there was there were activities set up for people out and about in the downtown area as well. Next slide, Shani. And so we found that the trials did have a very significant impact on the state's economy. So this has been updated a little bit with, we've gotten data from the USAG on their spending for the event, which is not included here yet. But you can see directly, so that's the amount of money that is just spent between the attendees and then Minnesota Sports and Events to put on the activity was $38 million. Of that, about 32 million was spending by people who came to the community. So the amount of money that was being spent, time plus all the number of people that were coming really drew a significant expenditures. But in total, this created about $74.5 million worth of economic activity in Minneapolis, St. Paul, supported 510 jobs, and created about $26 million in labor income. Again, money into the pocket of the people who worked at these events and also are part of this. And we did, in the report, we also look at the tax impact. The state of Minnesota did put some funding into helping host this event. And you'll see in that report, they got a pretty good, significant return on their investment in terms of just taxes collected. So Shani, I'll stop there.
Cluster has 4 presentations, as you can see on the slide. And the focus of this cluster is all about outdoor recreation. And so without further ado, let's welcome Nicole Pokorney for her presentation.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we just had a great breakout, or I did, with the ATV session. My name's Nicole Pokorney. I am the 4-H Outdoor Education Program Director for Minnesota 4-H, which is part of Extension and the Department of Youth Development. This program is only 18 months old. We have had shooting sports and ATV safety programs for many, many, many years. However, we have now created this outdoor education piece of outdoor education of getting kids and families outdoors. And so we're very excited about that. It's still in the new stages. And it's great to talk to all of you because right now it's all about partnerships, the DNR, the tourism, ATV safety, the trails, park and rec, all of that piece is that we're really excited to start partnering even deeper with all of you to see how we can get youth and families outdoors. So next slide, please. So my little 5-minute thing here is really about why we're doing this. Why was this outdoor education program established? Is that we know nature promotes learning, and a lot of this came out during COVID. I know it's like the bad C word. People don't talk about it anymore, but they don't. But that's when people got outdoors. Those of you from the DNR, we saw parks and state parks just flooded with people because people needed and wanted to get outdoors. And within all that research really came out that nature promotes learning back in the schools, back in the programs, the after school programs, the self-discipline, it relieves stress, just all of the research on attention, engagement with others, physical activities, just really the cooperative relations, all of that. So we know that the research is there. All of you can find that, but that is one of those catalysts that really helped our program develop over the last 4 or 5 years. Next slide, please. So part of my research, so I was doing a whole research study and then COVID happened. So I did a lot of it. I actually have interviewed a couple of you all here on this, but my thing is that what makes a super good outdoor program? And so those of you developing programs or wanting to in your communities, like what makes that a really, really good program? So there's 8 essential components, and that you can just hit all of those on the slide for all of you to read, because this is like a whole 3-hour program that I actually do. But having safety and support, so those we're doing a lot of work with populations who are historically not represented in the outdoors. how do we provide a sense of safety and support? Making sure there's a social support. So groups, it may be a family, it might be a population, it might be a community. Being able to break away from normal life, there is a guided experience. So whether it's you who are in your positions, or you have volunteers, or you have guides that help develop that experience, there's an invitation to explore. There's a challenge out there. It might just be getting outdoors. I have family and friends who just like, the outdoors is not for me. You know, like there's just not a chance. The challenge for them is just to get outdoors. The intensity, having more than one program, but what's next? What's after that one program? Teaching someone to canoe, but then what's next? And then SEL is a social emotional learning. The previous slide talked about all of those things that promotes learning, or that nature does, but then what are those activities that actually foster that social emotional learning in our youth and our families? Next slide. So the research also talks about dosage of nature. So weekly, we should have 20 minutes of outdoor time. I am talking to, you know, the choir here, but 20 minutes of outdoor times 3 times a week is hard for a lot of people. What does that mean? In your communities, do you have places and activities that actually foster that 20 minutes of outdoor time 3 times a week? Monthly, we should have 5 hours of outdoor, somewhere semi-wild. I have 2 sons that live in Chicago, and they find the outdoorsy places in Chicago to spend some time out there. State Park, a new hiking trail, ATV trails, getting outdoors semi-wild. And then yearly, we should spend 3 days a remote location where we can avoid ourselves of technology, reset ourselves. In your communities, do you have places for that? So the research is saying the doses of nature actually counts. Next slide. So trying to be a little youth development-y here is like, how can you provide outdoor-based learning experiences to help foster the health benefits for children, youth, and families? I would love to, if we can we populate the chat? Where are some places that you in your business or your community, how do you foster those types of experiences for our families?
All right, wonderful. So, chats, please roll in, and thank you, Nicole, for setting the stage for this cluster. So next we have 2 planners from Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, Darin and Gratia, and 2 presentations back to back, both from the 2022 State Park Visitor Study Survey and focus groups.
Yeah, thanks, Shinyi. So yeah, I'm Darin Newman, and Gratia Joice is here with me. We're both Parks and Trails planners with the Department of Natural Resources. So we split our time across planning, project management, and research. And we're breaking the rules a little bit. We have two 5-minute presentations on different components of the same project. Really ties in closely to a lot of the things that Nicole just shared. So yeah, happy to be here. So we have a research agenda for Parks and Trails that guides our overall research priorities. That includes a rotation across different systems that we manage. So this is highlighting one of the recent projects that Gratia managed, the State Park Visitor Study in 2022. So that included 3 kind of main parts. There's a visitor survey that was done in the summer, Memorial Day weekend through Labor Day. An economic impact assessment of trip spending associated with state park visits. And then we also completed some focus groups as part of that. So that's the portion that Gratia is going to be talking about after I summarize some of the highlights of the qualitative study. So yeah, first on demographics. We find that state park visitors tend to be higher income, more highly educated, and more likely to be white than the Minnesota population as a whole. So that's what you see here on this slide. So this isn't really big surprised it's consistent with some of the past studies that we've done on a 5-year rotating basis for state parks. Go to the next slide. We also see that there's slightly more women visiting parks than men. Middle-aged adults ages 35 to 54 were a little bit overrepresented compared to the Minnesota population. And we also see there's lots of groups at state parks with children and teens. So those two things taken together really show the role that state parks play in serving families and serving children. And then at the bottom, you see there that BIPOC visitors, Black, Indigenous, and people of color make up about 11% of state park visitors compared to 21% as the Minnesota population as a whole. So we have seen that increase in recent surveys. So in 2017, which was the previous iteration of this project, people of color made up about 5% of park visits. So in this 2022 survey, a lot of BIPOC visitors, about half of BIPOC visitors said that they were new to state parks within the last 5 years. So those two things taken together really show us that there has been an increase in racial diversity. So that's the good news, that we're seeing that increase, that that pace seems to be increasing. But of course, you see here that there is still quite a gap, and definitely more work to do to make sure we're serving everyone's needs in the state parks and programs we're providing. So yeah, as part of this project, we also asked people's opinions about future changes. So the ones that are highlighted in bold here are some of the most supported changes that visitors decided for the future. And those are prioritizing protecting the natural areas and cultural resources, and by limiting development in our state parks, providing more hiking trails, and providing more exhibits and self-guided learning opportunities. And I think these are consistent with the top activities that people participate in parks, and some of the reasons that people said why they're most satisfied with their visits. So it really suggests us to kind of focus on some of those basic services and the basic needs that people have when they're visiting. Next slide. So on the economic impact assessment part, so obviously visitors are, there's a lot of local use, but also people traveling from quite a distance to go to these areas around the state, and their spending is supporting local economies and communities all around the state. All told, trip spending by park visitors generates just under $700 million each year. So on this slide, we have the breakout by some different categories of visitors. So on average, it's $67 per person per day. It's a little bit more for visitors, overnight park visitors who are staying in the state park. Day use visitors, just for the day, is the lowest at $37. And then there's also quite a share of visitors who are visiting the state park just for the day, but they're staying overnight at other accommodations in the area. So a hotel, vacation rental, a private cabin, or elsewhere. And kind of by definition, they're spending on lodging, which is why their spending per person per day is the highest at about $125 a day. So then I'll turn it over to Gratia to talk about some of the focus groups.
All righty. Hello, everyone. My name is Gratia Joice, as Darin mentioned, also a planner with DNR Parks and Trails, and I'll be discussing some of the results from a focus group series that we did as part of the 2022 State Park Visitor Study. And this focus group I'll be discussing today was about creating inclusive spaces in state parks, which focused on engaging communities of color about their past state park experience and learning about their perspectives on creating a safe and welcoming environment in state parks. So we worked with Wilder Research on the 2022 park study. You can go back to the previous slide, not quite done with that one. We had a facilitator who shared the same racial or ethnic background as the participants to create a free-flowing and welcoming environment for the participants. And we focused on groups that identified in one of the following 4 racial or ethnic identities. So we had Asian American, Black or African American, Latino, and Indigenous. And in total, we had 33 participants across this group. And then our key research questions were, why do people choose the outdoor places or activities they engage with? What are people's past experiences with Minnesota state parks, and what were their challenges and successes? And then, do people feel that they are safe, belong, and are accepted in Minnesota state parks? And what features contribute to feelings of comfort or safety? You can go to the next slide. So after analyzing the transcripts from the focus groups, kind of three main barriers emerged, and these don't come as too much of a surprise. They are money, time, and transportation. So folks mentioned that, the cost from entry fees or camping fees definitely can create a barrier, and especially for first-time campers or people visiting state parks where the outdoor recreation facilities, such as yurts or camper cabins, are more expensive than tent camping, but those generally are a better kind of entry level accommodation for folks. And then second, finding the time and the traveling can be a barrier with the time it takes to travel and the costs associated with that. And then also the reservation system. We hear that it can be tricky to navigate, and you kind of feel like you need some kind of insider knowledge to know where to go and when to book. And oftentimes, we have a 120-day reservation window, and for a lot of folks, they don't know what their schedule is like that far in advance, which can make it really hard for them to get reservations. You can go to the next slide. In addition to sharing reasons to visit Minnesota state parks and the barriers people have experienced, participants were also asked to share the degree to which they feel safe and welcome. And when it comes to feeling welcome and a sense of safety, participants shared that representation and numbers matter. So it's really important for them to see others who look like them to create a sense of ease and safety when they're visiting these spaces. And so this translates not only into the people who are also out recreating at the park, but the staff as well. And so you can see a quote here from one of the participants about parks often being dominated by white people. And, going back to what Darin shared about the percentage of white versus BIPOC visitors, that definitely aligns up. And also with this one, people also mentioned feeling safer in parks that were closer to urban areas or population centers as well. And then the next slide. And so having staff visible and accessible was another really important thing. So having welcoming staff who are out checking in with people was really important. And then again, going back to what we saw in the previous slide, especially seeing folks on staff that look like them was really important to making people feel safe and welcome in state parks. So another really important quote that we got from a focus group participant on seeing somebody who looked like them and how that really made them feel like, yes, this is a space for them too. And then lastly, we asked folks, if they were to design a park for their friends and family, what would they include? So there were kind of 6 main takeaways from this. So park staff and rangers should be visible and accessible and diverse. Improve options for communication with the outside world in case of emergencies. So, access to Wi-Fi. We have a lot of parks in remote areas of the state where you may not have a great signal. So what are some options for communicating? Provide additional programming options, especially for families. Park signage should be inclusive, decolonized, and acknowledge the history of each park. And parks should be accessible to those with a variety of needs. And we should include the Indigenous voice in our park programming guidelines and signage. And that is all I have.
Well, thank you both so very much for your presentations. And the last presentation in this cluster is coming from Dr. Ami Choi, statewide specialist of the Tourism Center.
Thanks, Shinny. Hi, everyone. I'm Ami Choi, a statewide tourism specialist at the U of M Tourism Center. And I'll be discussing a little bit about our work on Outdoor Recreation Visitor Equity Index. So this work is done together with Dr. Ingrid Schneider and our amazing student researchers, Daniel, Ted, and May from the U. And I just want to thank our research team for working hard and the Sea Grant for funding this project. So outdoor recreation offers relaxation, joy, and connection, whether it's a hiking or spending a day by the lake. These experiences are vital for our health and well-being. But unfortunately, access to these spaces and benefits isn't always equal. BIPOC communities often feel like these spaces aren't for them, and this might be especially true in places like Lake Superior's North Shore. Minnesota's population also is diversifying quickly. Communities of color are growing 5 times faster than the white population. And as of 2023, the Black African American community is the fastest growing group in the state. But despite this change, BIPOC visitors remain underrepresented in our state parks and public lands. And so in our study, we wanted to explore this by using the Visitor Inequity Index to see how well the local population is reflected in visitor data, focusing on Black and BIPOC communities. Next slide, please. So we focused on state parks in 3 counties along the Lake Superior's North Shore, Cook, Lake, and St. Louis. For our analysis, we used the latest census data and 3 data sets, the Superior National Forest National Visitor Use Monitoring data, and DNR's 2022 State Park Visitor data. Thank you for letting us use your data. And the county level tourism data from Explore Minnesota Tourism using their location-based services data. Across these data sets, we identified the percentage of the population and visitors that identified as Black and BIPOC, and we considered the distance visitors traveled. So all miles they traveled to particular recreation entity and local visitors who travel less than 50 miles. And following David Flores's work with National Forests at the national level in 2018, we calculated the Visitor Equity Index to compare the percent Black and BIPOC visitors to the local population at both county and regional levels. So the index ranges from minus 100 to positive 100. And if it's a 0, good, visitor diversity matches the local population and there's no difference. The negative value means smaller percentage of Black and BIPOC, so inequitable. And positive value means greater percentage of Black and BIPOC visitors, so representing more equitable in their composition. And Flores suggests that a 5% difference or more in either direction is considered significant. So we use this threshold in our analysis. So next slide, please. Okay, so first, just looking at the census data, we see a predominantly white population in all of these counties. And we see BIPOC larger than Black alone, which varies across counties. And this is particularly notable in Lake County. They have a smaller percentages of both Black and BIPOC populations. Next slide. All right. So looking at the index for state parks specifically and these 3 counties, surprisingly, or perhaps not surprisingly, the Visitor Equity Index was negative from 2 data sets for Cook and St. Louis counties for BIPOC visitors overall, meaning they were underrepresented, but positive for Lake, and this indicates more representation. And these differences are, although they are relatively small, but based on the 5% marker, the differences were significant for BIPOC visitors in Cook and Lake counties. Next slide. So in sum, there are clear inequities in recreation visitation for Black and BIPOC communities along the North Shore. And I do want to acknowledge that public data on visitorship with race and ethnicity information is super limited. And the sample sizes, especially for Black visitors, were small. So it was reasonable to combine data at the county and regional levels. So there's clearly a gap there. And last but not least, further exploration through both qualitative and quantitative approaches to better understand and identify the constraints, perceptions, and experiences of these communities is important and needed And so that's what we were doing recently, the qualitative stage. So we're currently in the process of recruiting participants for our focus groups to dive deeper into these experiences of Black African American communities in Minnesota. So we hope to have more findings to share at the next year's showcase. So stay tuned. Thank you.
Now, the last stretch, certainly not the least. Our third and a final cluster of presentations, we have 3 here, and on the surface, the topics seem a little bit scattered, but in reality, they are united by one common thing, that is methodology. So when we do research, we have different methods, different approaches, right? And different ways about getting our data. And so we are going to talk about methodology, both more traditional and newer. And so the first presentation brought to you by Michael Duggar.
Hello. So my topic that I've been studying is business succession and transition, and there are approximately 50,000 businesses that have employees in Minnesota, including hospitality, that are owned by owners of 55 plus years old. So this is a big issue in economic development and tourism in particular. So we've been at this for about 10 years in extension. We've done 2 research projects, we offer education, and we have a YouTube BST channel. So basically it takes a village to transfer a business, and we've been trying to hold up the torch for a BST ecosystem, if you will. So this is my elevator pitch. Everyone in the BST ecosystem is important, yet no one is sufficient by themselves. In terms of preparing the business, accountants and lawyers, of course, are very important, and our research backs that up, but there are many other professionals in this space. Now, separate but related is the topic of preparing the business, the person. So this gets into psychology and emotional intelligence. And so other business owners and spouses and other people are important for helping prepare the business for this major transition. Liz Templin is a retiree from our shop. She did research several years ago where we found out that a rural business, that the ones that successfully transferred needed anywhere from 3 to 5 professionals to help them get across the finish line. So there's a lot for business owners to know and to do. I'd say just treat it like a shotgun start golf event. Just start anywhere, because you're gonna have to cover several different topics. So just get going. And we have some things to help, like you see here. Next slide. So in the research that I did, which was a mail out survey using the Dillman method, it's massive amounts of US mail. But basically we surveyed business owners who had 5 to 500 employees across Minnesota, including all the tourism sectors. Now, almost all sectors were included. And we asked them what, one of the things we asked them about is what they were most concerned about. And so you can interact with this data on our website, on this data dashboard. So one of the dashboards allows you to compare the results from different industry sectors. So on the top of this slide shows the overall results. Almost 300 owners responded. And on the bottom graph shows you the 29 hospitality sector NAICS 72 who responded. And what we find is that there's a lot of similarity between the values regarding business succession transition between this sector and all the businesses overall. But the hospitality operators had a slightly stronger concern that their business be financially successful after the transition. And they also had a higher concern, slightly, for keeping the business local. So note that these data are premised on a 6-point Likert scale, where 6 is to a great extent and 1 not at all. So another data dashboard that's not shown here indicates that accommodations and food owners are much more likely to sell to a third-party buyer than the other businesses overall. Overall, the businesses were much more interested in strategic buyers. So you can learn more about that on our website. Next slide. So about this BST, Business Succession Transition Village, again, no one advisor is sufficient by themselves. So what we see here is that we asked the businesses both about their personal readiness and their business readiness. And what we found was that even though these are separate but related issues, whether the person and the business. So in this slide, we show the effect of on business readiness of three of the most important advisors out of 4. And so the accountant, the attorney, and the spouse all contribute about a 0.5 point on that 6-point scale. And if they use all 3 of those types of advisors, then they move from only a 3.2 to over a 4.5 on the business readiness scale. So again, all these people are important, but none of them is sufficient. This takes a village. And this is statistically significant because we really got large numbers of respondents. You can find this slide in an article we did with DEED, the Minnesota Employment Trends on their website. Next slide. So we have tools for owners, buyers, and people around the businesses too. And we have this YouTube channel with 2 to 3 minute videos with several different playlists. And I would suggest, for example, if one video is, if you don't have an exit strategy, you don't have a strategy. Another one is about kind of for people around the businesses, poke the bear, bring this up. You might kind of tick someone off, but someone's got to bring this up with the business owners and in fact, inside of communities. So please check out these resources and research results at our extension website and reach out to myself or Shin-Yi. We'd like to see if we can partner with the hospitality industry on a business succession and transition course for the businesses who want to become more ready for this important transition for themselves and for their business. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Our next presentation will be coming from Ms. Didi Lemire.
Thank you so much. So I have the pleasure today of being able to expand a little bit on some of the ways that we've been applying mobile data in the economic analysis projects that have been happening in our shop. And the slides that I have for you today are actually an excerpt from a presentation that Brigid Tuck and I did at the National Community Development Extension Professionals Conference in Texas. And what I wanted to share with you today, really like 4 of the broad ways that we're seeing mobile data, being able to help expand economic impact analysis and using traditional methods of gathering data. So in this slide here, on the left, you can see the survey respondents, and you can see sort of their times of day. And when we're doing surveys, it's often like an intercept survey where you're actually like standing there and talking with people that are visiting a given space. And so we're really dependent on when volunteers are able to visit a space, and that can very much impact the times of day that surveys are being conducted. On the other hand, when we look at mobile analytics, we're able to look at a space in a given location over a 24-hour period, and we can look across the entire week. So on the left are those traditional survey responses and when those are collected, and you can see there's a lot more variation. But then when we looked at the same site using mobile data analytics, you can see that there's a significant uptick in usage over the weekends. This was also, potentially impacted by events in that space and other times where a traditional survey would not be a good fit because of it being kind of an outlier activity, but where we're still able to capture it using mobile data analytics. If you go to the second slide there, and I see your question, Ami, I might need a little clarification on it, but when we're looking at those traditional surveys, as I said, depending when we can get volunteers or when we have paid surveyors that are part of a project, they may be able to be on site for a limited amount of time. And one area that we've really found that mobile data can be helpful is to be able to get a sense of when are users actually showing up on site. And so with this sample that was part of the ATV research, you can see that there's a lot of activity happening between 12 and 5, but there are some outliers that at 9 a.m. there was some activity, but also at 9 p.m. And this is something that just would not be financially feasible or time-wise feasible to have a surveyor necessarily out for 12 hours a day in, day out. And then when we look at the visit trends, that's another area that we've been able to see some real benefits from using mobile data, because we can look backwards in time. So even if we're working on a pressing project, and say something like the Olympic example, we can still look at the past activity that was happening at like the Target Center to be able to see like, hey, is this different? Is this consistent? And it allows us a lot more flexibility versus if we're using traditional survey methods, we're really limited to when those paper surveys or intercept surveys were completed, or when there may have been trail counters out, that you're really just limited to, was there a trail counter there or not? And that's the boundaries of your possible data collection. And with mobile data, we get some more opportunities for doing comparative studies, testing, is this consistent? Is it an outlier? And then the additional area that it's definitely been a big add in our work is to be able to understand those community connections. And this is one example of the way that those connections are displayed using the current software that we're using, which is Placer AI. And that can be displayed in a variety of ways through mapping. We can export some data. And we're continuing to understand, what are the benefits of this, where may there be some limitations in the validity of this data. But over and over again, we're finding that these connections are really available through mobile data in a way that isn't readily available for other kinds of research studies. And we're starting to explore how we may even be able to use that to sort of understand some of the patterns, beyond just the use for a particular site, but to understand some community level ones, which I'll go into in the next presentation. But this is often a question that we get from community members, is like, what is the impact? That's really what they're trying to get at when they're asking us to do an economic impact analysis. And being able to display these kinds of connections has been a critical value add of incorporating mobile data into our work. And I really appreciated earlier, there was a question in the chat of, what are some of our findings about applying this data? And I think that there are a few key areas that are important to make sure are included in conversations about it. We've found that some of the benefits included, being able to verify some of that accuracy of a traditional survey. We're able to enhance it, as in some of the examples that I've shared. And I think something that is not a small benefit at all is actually being able to create some opportunities for community conversation through visualizing, what are those patterns and ways that visitors are connecting to the community. That said, there are some drawbacks as well, that mobile data on its own is not enough data for us to do an economic impact study. The subscriptions are expensive, and it's taken a lot of investment of time for staff to be appropriately trained on the software. And then the tools themselves are constantly changing and updating. They pull from all different kinds of data sources through apps and things, but those still change. And so we're continuing to work on how we're capturing some of that information for a historical record, but we certainly cannot rely on the software itself to provide that. And then there is some complexity around those data sources, and just not, there's kind of a black box effect. So we're not able to kind of go down to those source data points the way that we might be able to with other forms of information that we bring into an economic impact analysis. So that's the information that I have for you about that today. I catch my breath for a second here. And then what I want to kind of move into is a more specific example. I am presenting today on behalf of my colleague, Eric King, and then he'll be joining the breakout session to answer questions as well. So we've been working on that comparative work for some time, using a couple different softwares of mobile data. And then over the last few months, Eric and I have been digging into really trying to understand how we can sort of expand on current data sources to understand resident shopping patterns in a community. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. This is really important in our work in community development because unfortunately, a lot of our data sources are really restricted by, political and geographic boundaries, such as city or township, zip codes, counties. But I'm sure that none of us, are getting to the edge of one of those boundaries and saying like, oh, sorry, I can't proceed. I have to turn around and, behave differently because of that arbitrary boundary. We know that as community members that we are going, across these kinds of boundaries all day, every day, throughout the course of our lives. So that has ultimately been one of the biggest, benefits of including mobile data, and why Eric and I kind of look to it to try and figure out how are we understanding some of these visit patterns, because the current data that's available is really restricted by these arbitrary boundaries. So as an example of that, if you go to the next slide, you can see just a little sample of data that was made available to us through the Minnesota Department of Commerce. And it just reflects the 2022 gross sales, taxable sales, and retailer count for one particular category of food and beverage sales. So this category, because the community is very small and there's only the 60 retailers, that's the smallest the category was made available to us. But it includes kind of all different kinds of food and beverage retailers. So that's groceries and dining, and all kinds of things. But it makes it really, really tricky when we're trying to understand what is happening in a particular community, because this is the smallest that we may be able to really distill particular data. So then if you go to the next slide, what we can do for small communities, such as a test community where they actually only have one grocery store. So we can never get that sales tax data, not available to us. But using mobile data, I was actually able to look at this test grocery store and to say, who was visiting this grocery store? Now, the piece that I really want to call out, because I know that there are many more communities that are using some of the mobile data and are exploring that. I think one of the important findings for this was that when I looked at the visitors and the users of the grocery store, that you could only track back to the zip code. And that's really important because the zip code actually includes both the city, the surrounding city, and the broader area. And so it's really important because I can't tell you from this that these are visitors from that town itself where the grocery is located. I can only say that it's from that zip code. So even though we can get smaller, we still can't get down to that city level. In further exploring the data, we were able to identify, though, if you go to the next one, that if we used the community itself as a boundary, we could actually tease out where the community residents were going to grocery stores based from the mobile data. And we could see that they were visiting a grocery store within the community for a portion of their visits, and then they were going outside of the community for the rest of their visit. And in this case, it's really kind of easy to isolate because there's one grocery store. And so you could see that in the data that 18.3% were to that local grocery store. But then over 80% of their other grocery visits, according to mobile data, were going to other grocery stores. And considering that the data showed over 1,000 other grocery stores, this is really a meaningful way for us to be able to sort of capture what are those behaviors of where people are going and where are they prioritizing their visits and their spending. And then if you go to the final slide, this is an area that we are, in the process of finalizing our community report. So we'll have something published here shortly with the community that we've been partnering with. But there are definitely some implications for future research. And so really just highlighting that mobile data can allow for some insights with small communities that are not accessible from traditional data sources, but that we really, really have to be very careful to make sure that what we're saying about the data actually tracks back to what the data is able to back up. So if we're talking about a particular city, and being mindful of those boundaries, or in some cases where the data may still only be able to get us down to that zip code level. And we also found that those traditional data sources really do contain information that's not included in the mobile data tools, and that we continue to have to rely on those as our first choice for data resources in our work.
And this is the end of our research showcase event. I'm not going to keep you any longer because it is already 1 o'clock Central Time. And one last reminder, which is when you close down your Zoom, there will be a pop-up 3-question evaluation survey. So tell us what you think. I hope this is time well spent, and thank you for participating in the breakout rooms to interact with our great presenters. So thank you all again, and watch out for a follow-up email from me with the video recording and then the slide deck in PDF format. With that, I also want to thank all the support that our support staff have provided to make this event possible. Thank you so much. Wish you all a wonderful fall season.